my name is Marilyn Binning. These are my partners, Warren Robinson and Cole Blocker. And today we're going to tell you about how we maximize the restaurant throughput at Maggiano. So today we're going to tell you about what kind of Maggiano's is, what our project objective was, a little bit about Open Table, our data that we received, how we input it into a model, and what our results and recommendations are. So Maggiano's is under the parent company Brinker. Brinker has started a lot of companies such as Macaroni Grill and Chili's. The only one they hold right now is Chili's and Maggiano's. There's 49 locations nationwide. All their locations are not a set floor plan. They're usually set into malls or already buildings that were already built. So there's no set floor plan for all of Maggiano's. So what they specialize in is casual dining and personal and family style meals. Our objective is to provide a maximum seating for the restaurant dependent on what day it is and what time it is. So a little bit about Open Table. Many of you probably used Open Table before. It's an app to reserve in a restaurant. So what there's another side of Open Table that a restaurant's able to use, and they can set up a floor plan and reserve for seating times. And something specific about Open Table is when you put in a 7:30 reservation, you're not just putting it into a whole system, you're specifically reserving a table. And something that also is important is that a restaurant is able to change their restrictions based on seasonality. So what we use seasonality in this model is a weekend dinner, a weekend lunch, or a weekday dinner and a weekday lunch.
So we took a multi-layered approach to our problem. First, we had to determine the difference in the queuing behavior for each season that Marilyn just mentioned. And then we had to figure out the optimal mix of the seating times for different tables. So what time should we be seating people for different party sizes? And then the optimal mix of the different table sizes available at those certain times, and then how we were obviously going to accomplish what we needed to accomplish. So we were particularly concerned with 4 different points for each season. So this is the average total tables seated, the distribution of the party size, which you can see on the upper right side, the distribution of the seating time, which is in the lower right, and the average seating time per party size. So one interesting thing to note is almost 60% of their tables are, and this is stuff we got from their data, are 2-top tables, and they're known for their bigger family style meals, but a lot of those over 7, it's only 6%. So that was one of the main points we used, and also was how long does each party sit? So obviously, more people, they're going to hang around longer, and they sit for an hour and a half if they're anywhere from 5 to 7. And 3 to 4 people sit for an hour and 15, and then if you have 1 or 2 people, this is for 60 minutes, and this is mostly for a dinner time. And then this is the average seatings per service that we received from their data. So for example, this is the weekday lunch. This is 48 seatings, or a weekday dinner 81. So it's clear to see, and something we would expect, that a weekend dinner, for example, is 157 seatings. There's so many people. It's a popular time to go to. This is the lunch and dinner demand distributions. Nothing super surprising here, but it is interesting to note how it tapers off the ends, and also interesting to note that we see spikes, and you can see it's up and down. We see spikes at every half-hour increment, so 6, 6:30, and that's due to you not saying I want a 6:15 reservation. And you can also see that the demand peaks at dinner at around anywhere from 6 to 6:45, and for lunch anywhere from 11:15 to 11:45, 12.
So now, as Cole has explained, now that we knew kind of how each season behaves differently, we had to figure out, okay, in a restaurant, how do you manage how many 2-tops you want to seat? Because the 60 amount of our tables are coming in are going to be 2-tops, but then 4-tops are actually sitting at a 4-person table and making more money. So you kind of had to manage all these different constraints and lay them out together. So we built an ample model. And we first decided that efficiency within a restaurant is dependent on having the correct mix of tables to accommodate the incoming parties. So the correct amount of 2-top, 4-top, and 5 to 7 parties available. And then restricting the types of restrictions coming through, so for each time slot. So if from the last slide, you could see that we have the same amount of demand coming in at 6:30 and at 7, but if you seat all of your tables at 6:30, you're gonna have no tables available at 7 o'clock. So that's gonna cause a problem for efficiency, obviously. So we built an ample model. Well, first we actually mapped out. Here's an example of dinner. We mapped out for both lunch and dinner how each table behaves. So, sorry for those in the back. It's kind of small, but so that first group at top is a table size of 1 to 2 people. And then the start group depends on when their first reservation is allowed. So a table size 2, start group A, their first reservation is at 5 o'clock. Then using the data that Cole explained, a 2-person party sits for 60 minutes. Then Maggiano's uses kind of a 15-minute standard turning. Either they sit a little bit longer and it takes about 15 minutes to clean up. So then they can put their next reservation in at 6:15. Now they can also seat one at 7:30 and at 8:45. However, if you go down to say like 2E, down at the bottom, if you seat your first reservation at 6 o'clock, they can only get 3 flips. They can do 6 o'clock, 7:15, and 8:30. Maggiano stops seating tables typically at 9 o'clock. So their dinner service is from 5 to 9, but tables can obviously sit longer. Then we broke up 3 to 4. So that table size 3 to 4, and then start group A, we just call them A4. But they are also sitting at their first seating at 5 o'clock. But they're sitting for 75 minutes, so their second reservation can't start until 6:30, then 8 o'clock, and they can get 3 flips in per night. So we mapped all of these out because this is all the different combinations of how tables are going to behave. It also is a good way for us to visualize who's sitting down at what time, and how do you manage that future demand. So kind of underneath the times there is that demand distribution for dinner that Cole explained. So 5% of our total demand is coming in at 5 o'clock, all the way down to 11% at 6:30, 11% at 7, and so on. So it was a good way for us to visualize, well, now 11% of our people are coming in at 7 o'clock, and these are the tables that are seating down, and these are the tables that have already been seated and are taken, so we can't put new people in there. So that was kind of probably the biggest way for us to see what's going on, map it out, and then go forward with our ample model. So we built a linear programming model, and our objective function was actually maximizing hypothetical revenue. So we weren't dealing with kind of how many people were coming in the door. So we're acting in kind of a perfect world, assuming that you have constant people coming in the door, constant wait, and this is just when you're seating them. So there's also the Maggiano's kind of standard is that different size parties actually spend different amounts per person on their check. So for example, a 2-person party, they spend about $21 average per person. So our objective function was maximizing our revenue. So it was $21 per person, 2 people at a table, and that first group, as I was explaining, has 4 flips in a night. So there's 4 flips times the amount of tables that are in that group. Whereas if you went down to say E2 or something, it'd be $21 per person, 2 people, 3 flips times the amount of tables that were in that group. So that was kind of going down and summing all of those up was our objective. We wanted to maximize that. Then, although there are lots of constraints, kind of our key constraints going into it were we wanted to have sufficient tables available to seat the expected demand at each time slot. So going down, how I explained, 5% at 5 o'clock, and let's say you have 100 tables coming in per night, you want to make sure you have at least 5 tables open, kind of to seat those people coming in. And so, as I was explaining, if you sit them all at 6:30, there's going to have no tables open to come at 7 o'clock. So that's kind of how we manage that. Then within that, we also wanted to have a proper distribution of 2 tops, 4 tops, and 6 tops. 4 tops are the 3 to 4, 6 is 5 to 7, but we want to have a proper distribution. So 58% of the total amount in the previous constraint was going to be 2 tops, whereas 26% of the previous one would be 4 tops and going forth. So that makes ensure that we're going to expect that we have 5 total, 3 of them are 2 tops, 1 4 top, 1 6 top, or whatever it was. We also are restricted by table inventory because there's only so much size. There's only so much size allowed in the restaurant, so square footage and the amount of tables. So by that last chart, we were able to sum out in each time slot everyone that was sitting at a certain time restricted by the amount of tables that they actually have, and then table type inventory. They only have a certain amount of 2 tops, 4 tops, and 6 tops. So those are kind of the key things that were driving us down to get to an answer. So we did this different model for each season. So weekday lunch, weekend lunch, weekday dinner, and weekend dinner. And here are kind of what the model spit out for us, and Cole will further explain to you how we actually put them into ample.
Yes.
Into open table.
Yeah, this is what ample spit out, but to make it easier, this is kind of an easier way to understand it. So, as Lauren was mentioning, for example, group A2, that's a group that sits at 5 o'clock, 6:15, 7:30, and then 8:45 again, right across the top row. There's 8 tables available on each of those time slots for that group. And one of the cool things about OpenTable and one of the constraints that we were trying to help them improve upon is for each table that you set, and then as someone makes a reservation, they get put on that table, you get to make the minimum and maximum amount of people that can sit at that table. So for example, A2 again, that's for 2 persons, so obviously it's a 1 minimum and a 2 maximum. And then again for A4, we would have 3 and then 4. And it's interesting to note that the 4 tops, there are a lot more 4 tops, and that is because, as Lauren mentioned, we want more 4 tops than 2 tops because we make more money off of them. So that's kind of what this is saying here.
And there's not really a way for us to tell specifically how many covers they can get through in a night currently, because they're kind of changing their settings and they don't have, this is saying like in a table distribution, this one table in this location only allows 1 to 2 parties at 5 o'clock, 6:15, 7:30, 8:45, and they're not operating like that. So we can know that their average right now is about a little over 600 covers for a weekend dinner. But right, with this model, we have the capability of sitting about 1,200. But we don't know that we can't tell that if the demand's gonna be there to actually sit the 1,200 in a night covers, but it does allow us for.
Yeah, they have that capacity.
Right, they have capacity to sit that.
So our next step is to expand it to all the Maggiano locations. The way we programmed it and to make it very adaptable for each location, because we can change how many tables they have and how many 2 tops, 4 tops, or 6 tops. We'd also like to expand to season data. This means like different holidays. The reason we weren't able to do this is because we did not have enough information. So just better records. And lastly, another step would to bring it to all of Brinker International, and that would be the Chili's locations. Are there any questions?
Question. So how do you include the factor if like party of 2 people come in and they want to sit in a top 4, like 4 top table?
So Maggiano's, they really don't have, because their whole layout is designed to be really versatile, so they don't have specific like 2 top, they have 2 top tables, but how we're seeing them is there's actually a 4 top table capable of sitting 4 people, but they're restricted to 2, because then they can combine them together and make bigger parties. Does that make sense? So they don't actually have 2 people, and so they also, in OpenTable, the maitre d' can manually put them in tables. So this is kind of the setting for like, this is to maximize it, but if you have specific things, you may not be operating at 100% efficiency, but you will be able to accommodate the different.
So like 2 top table kind of means 2 people, not necessarily a smaller table. It still could be 4 people that could sit there.
Any other questions?
So I have a question on the, so the open table data, was that the one that said 5%, 11%, 5%, 11%?
Yeah.
And on the 15, but your model is telling them instead, does your model kind of try to smooth that a little bit and say that you need to have more 5:15, 5:45, 6:15?
So you know, on OpenTable, if you say you want a 7 o'clock reservation, it'll say like, okay, well I can get 2 people in at 6:45 or 7:15. It kind of says that you restrict, if they have a 7 o'clock table open, it'll allow it, but if it doesn't, it'll still kind of allow those other ones.
So they can get more flips that way.
Right.
And another thing was, what they're doing right now with OpenTable, they're just putting it in manually by the way they see it every day. So what they do right now is they're just restricting their dinner times where not that many 2 tops can be there. But what our model shows is that's not necessarily very helpful, because you're able to flip more tables because the times are smaller.
Other questions? Maybe one other one. So you mentioned that this was like the perfect situation, people show up and you sit them down, you know. What would you do differently than to start handling more complexity?
Well, if we have more information on like the actual demand of like when they're coming in, is that what you're kind of asking in?
Mm-hmm.
Like how to bring in more people?
And how to handle the non-perfect world.
Well, our perfect world has a demand of 1,200, and that's a little not realistic for that many people reserving at Maggiano. It's just not as popular of a place. So I think just having the availability of them to go onto open table and have more options, because that was one of the first things Michael told us, or the person we were working with told us, was that what they're trying to avoid is people, they just go into open table and they say we want 4 people at 7 o'clock, and if Maggiano's isn't on there, then they just go to the next restaurant. So they just want that availability, that they have more options for open table.
Alright, good.